as Angela mentioned, I'm presenting Bridging Barriers, a framework for effective evolution and ecology communication in exhibitions. So this was part of my graduate thesis work in which I was looking at how exhibit teams at natural history museums can better communicate evolution and ecology in exhibitions on dinosaurs, human evolution, climate change, those kinds of topics, really with an effort of supporting the museum's educational goals, as well as broader efforts towards public science literacy around topics like climate change and human health. So I wanted to start by taking a look back at the history of evolution and ecology exhibitions. These are topics that natural history museums have been presenting pretty much since they were founded hundreds of years ago, often towards a very scholarly audience. But nowadays, as far more public-facing institutions, they have a lot of opportunity to tap into these rich collections of exciting specimens and cutting-edge science going on behind the scenes to create really engaging learning opportunities about evolution and ecology. What this learning looks like can vary wildly. It's not just about learning facts, but also about having hands-on experiences with science, talking about these ideas with friends and family, and even learning new ideas that contribute to the lifelong process of incorporating these ideas into our understanding of the world. So what I wanted to do with this project was really understand how I, as an exhibit creator, could take research on evolution and ecology teaching and apply that to my practice in designing and developing exhibitions, and ultimately create a tool that other exhibit creators could turn to help transform this research into a tool for design. And so in my work looking at evolution and ecology teaching in formal and informal spaces, looking at design and strategic communication, as well as speaking with practitioners in natural history institutions doing design work, visitor research, education, I really started to see a lot of the same challenges popping up again and again. And these are things that I came to call barriers, and they really led me to develop this barriers and bridges framework. So barriers were these challenges that stood between visitors going to an exhibition and having a fun time, seeing some neat things, and visitors going to an exhibition and really having meaningful learning takeaways that changed how they thought about ideas, or gave them a more scientifically informed way to make decisions about something in their own lives. And so if this was the experience that ultimately led to the education goals we wanted to meet, there had to be things that we could do as exhibit creators to help visitors meet these challenges and overcome them in our exhibitions. And so through my research, I ultimately identified 6 key barriers. These were primary or universal challenges that visitors face in evolution and ecology exhibitions. So I wanted to go through those 6 barriers and highlight some of the bridges that I identified that can help address them. The first is complex content. Evolution and ecology are really complicated topics. It can be hard for anyone to understand, but especially non-expert visitors that are having more of a leisure experience than a formal learning experience. And so as exhibit creators, it's important to frame this complicated information in contexts that might be more readily familiar to visitors, things like color or biome that they might already know a little bit about, as well as use terms that are familiar to them to help them understand these complicated ideas. Another barrier is relevance and relatability. It can be hard to see how these esoteric sciences might relate to our own lives. And so by presenting these ideas in the context of issues visitors are dealing with in their own lives, things that they're familiar with in a day-to-day basis, we can help them see how the science that we present really has meaning for their own lives and create motivation to have that deeper learning experience. Another barrier, particularly in complex science exhibitions dealing with topics like evolution, is cognitive biases. The way we think about some of these topics can often lead us down incorrect paths of understanding. But in exhibits, we have a great opportunity to create sort of enjoyable interactive reasoning activities where people can think about how they're thinking about these things and hopefully come to more correct understandings of them. Another bias or another challenge we face is ideological biases. Visitors come into our exhibitions with a wide variety of existing beliefs and values, whether those come from religious, cultural, or political backgrounds, that really shape how they interact with the content we're presenting. And while we're not likely to change these deeply held belief systems in the context of a single visit, what we can do is really present examples how they can incorporate the new ideas that we're sharing in our exhibit into their existing understandings. And when we're urging action on certain critical issues, it's important to appeal to that wide range of values that visitors might hold so that we can move toward a common goal from a variety of different perspectives. There's also the barrier of learning needs. Visitors have a wide variety of different learning needs based on who they are, where they are in their visit, whatever that context may be, that's really shaping how they want to interact with content. And so it's important to provide multiple ways of interacting with the content, whether that's digital experiences or didactic experiences, as well as meaningful learning takeaways at different levels of engagement, whether they're just reading the titles on labels or they're spending 20 minutes digging into a digital interactive. And lastly, there's experience needs. This can be one that's pretty easy to forget about when we're so focused on a single exhibit, but it's important to foster a really welcoming environment in the museum that helps visitors feel prepared to have those deeper learning experiences. And this often requires a lot of collaboration with broader museum teams to help support a welcoming culture, providing clear wayfinding, and all these different features that make visitors feel comfortable within the space. So to put this framework to the test, I partnered with the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia to evaluate some label rails with their T-Rex fossil in the dinosaur hall. So I conducted a two-part evaluation. The first part, I looked at visitors' learning takeaways from the existing interpretive label rails around the fossil. And in the second part, I redesigned those label rails, applying the barriers and bridges framework, and evaluated visitors' learning takeaways from the new set of labels. So I wanted to go through this process of redesigning one of the label rails to show both what this evaluation entailed and also how the framework can be applied. So with this label rail, I focused particularly on the map on the left-hand side that showed that the T-Rex on display had been found in Montana. So looking at this label, I tried to identify what barriers a visitor might face in interacting with this map. And I came up with two. The first was relevance and relatability. How would the fact that the T-Rex was found in Montana matter to a visitor in Philadelphia? And the second was complex content, because any map or graphic can be inherently kind of hard for visitors to interpret. So looking at these barriers, I turned to research and experience with the first evaluation, seeing how visitors responded to the existing labels to develop solutions that could help them overcome these barriers. For relevance and relatability, I focused on the idea that connecting past ecology to present place can really help foster a lot of connection. And to do this in the label, I included Philadelphia as a location point on the map to help make that visual connection, and incorporated a label talking about how the T-Rex never actually lived in Philadelphia, to help visitors make that connection between the past ecology of the place they lived in and the fossil on display. When it came to complex content, I focused on really streamlining the graph, making it as readily understandable as possible by moving things like the key right up onto the map and simplifying some of the color contrast there. And this really helped to support what I observed being a lot of the audience in the space was a much younger audience. So making that map as simple and more readily interpretable as possible was really important. So ultimately, my evaluation findings were pretty encouraging that the barriers and bridges framework could help support greater learning takeaways from the exhibit. I found that visitors reported a wider variety of content takeaways from the exhibit, and particularly those that were developed through the barriers and bridges framework. Things like that connection to local ecology with the T-Rex never living in Philadelphia, as well as a label that was sort of a short 10-word quick fact that I developed in response to the observation that a lot of visitors were moving pretty rapidly through this high traffic space. So by creating a sort of bold, quick takeaway fact, I was able to create that meaningful engagement at a pretty top level moment of interaction. So reflecting back on the project, I think ultimately I was able to do two things within the realm of theory. It both brought together a wide variety of research into evolution and ecology teaching, visitor design, strategic communication, under this single lens that was something that was within the scope of practical use by exhibit creators, but also with the diversity of the barriers, reminds us just how multifaceted visitors' experiences are with the content we're presenting, and encourage us to be really mindful of these different elements of their experience that affects how they engage with our exhibits. And so one of the primary products of this project was a toolkit that I developed that outlined the 6 barriers and provided a sort of reference library of bridges so that practitioners that might be facing a particular challenge in their exhibit could turn to that page in the toolkit and find some solutions and ideas for how to overcome it. And so throughout this project, I really noticed how a lot of these barriers seem to be universal challenges in exhibits at a wide variety of institutions. Things like complex content and ideological biases are things we see in history and cultural institutions, even art museums. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to continue to explore how this framework can be applied to different types of institutions. In my current role at a history museum, I think in presenting moments of complex history, turning to a framework like this can be a great way to look at how visitors will be interacting with that content and think about what are strategic bridges that I can develop to help them meet that challenge head on and hopefully overcome it. Well, thank you so much. I've included my email and website here in case you're interested in learning more or reaching out. I'd love to hear from you.